The dust of Jericho Springs settled on everything, turning the white prairie dress Lynn wore to a uniform shade of gray. It clung to the hem, puffed up from the boardwalk with every step, and coated her tongue with the taste of grit and failure. She stood across from the swinging doors of the saloon, her knuckles white around the handle of the small satchel that held everything she owned: a change of clothes, her mother's last letter, and $7. It was not nearly enough. The afternoon sun was a hammer, beating down on the raw timber of the Nevada town. Men glanced at her, their eyes lingering with a mixture of pity and appraisal that made her skin crawl. She was 19, alone, and the daughter of a man who had died owing money to the wrong person. That person was Mr. Abernathy, owner of the general store, a man whose smile was as thin and sharp as a shard of glass. He had given her an ultimatum 2 days ago, his voice slick with false sympathy. The debt from her father's laundry was considerable. She could work it off, he'd suggested, as his wife. The thought sent a tremor through her. She would rather throw herself under the wheels of a freight wagon. That desperation had led her here, to this sun-scorched patch of dirt, waiting for a man she had only ever seen from a distance, a man they called Caleb Blackwood. She had heard the stories. They said he had killed a man in a dispute over a horse. They said he had broken another man's arm for looking at him wrong. They said he lived alone on a failing ranch miles from town because no decent person could stand his presence. But they also said one other thing. No one crossed him. Not even a man as powerful as Abernathy. Lynn's plan was a frantic prayer, a bargain forged in the dead of night. She would offer him the only thing she had left to give, her life's labor. She would be his wife in name, his servant in truth. It was a cold and terrible calculus, but it was a choice. Abernathy offered no choice at all. The saloon door swung open and he appeared. Caleb Blackwood was taller than she'd realized, broad in the shoulders, with a stillness about him that seemed to suck the noise from the street. His face was weathered by sun and wind, and a pale scar cut a line from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone, pulling the corner of his eye into a permanent, unnerving squint. He paused on the boardwalk, his gaze sweeping the street, and for a moment Lynn's courage failed her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. This was madness. But then her eyes caught sight of Abernathy, watching from the window of his store, a proprietary smirk on his face. The sight of it was like a splash of icy water. Her fear of the unknown was great, but her fear of the known was greater. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and walked directly into Caleb Blackwood's path. He stopped, looking down at her. His eyes were the color of slate, flat and unreadable. He did not seem surprised, or angry, or even curious. He simply waited. The town watched. She could feel their stares like physical things pressing in on her. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with the afternoon heat. Lynn swallowed the dust in her throat. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "I have a proposal for you." He remained silent, his expression unchanging. "I will work your house, cook your meals, and tend your land," she continued, the words coming out in a rush. "I will mend your clothes and keep your accounts. I am a hard worker, and I will ask for nothing but a roof over my head. In exchange," she took a breath, the final, terrifying piece of her offer, "I ask that you marry me." A murmur went through the onlookers. A woman gasped. Caleb Blackwood's face remained a mask of stone. He looked at her for a long, silent moment, his gaze so intense it felt as though he were seeing straight through her skin to the frantic pulse in her throat. She expected him to laugh, to sneer, to turn and walk away. She braced herself for the humiliation. Instead, when he finally spoke, his voice was a low rasp, like stones grinding together. I'll need to see the deed." The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. Her blood ran cold. He hadn't asked her name. He hadn't asked why she, a Chinese girl, would make such an outlandish proposal to a man like him. He hadn't asked about her circumstances or her troubles. He had asked about property. He was exactly what they said he was, a cold, hard man who saw the world in acres and dollars. She had fled one merchant only to offer herself to another. For a moment, all the air went out of her. The hope she had clung to felt foolish and thin. But his eyes were still on her, waiting. She had come this far. She would not falter now. "I have no land," she said, her voice hollow. "I have nothing. My father's laundry was lost to debt." Caleb's gaze flickered past her, a barely perceptible motion towards Abernathy's store. "Not your deed," he said, his voice flat. "His." Understanding dawned on her, slow and confusing. He already knew. He knew about Abernathy, about the laundry, about her impossible situation. He hadn't been asking what she owned. He had been assessing the nature of the conflict he was being asked to enter. It wasn't a dismissal. It was a calculation. "He holds the paper," she confirmed, her voice barely a whisper. Caleb gave a short, sharp nod. "Get your things." It was a command, not a suggestion. Before she could process it, he turned and walked toward a wagon hitched outside the blacksmith's forge. It was old and battered, and the horse harnessed to it looked as weary and stubborn as its owner. Lynn stood frozen for a second before a new kind of panic set in. This was happening. She hurried back to the small room she rented behind the laundry, her mind reeling. She grabbed her satchel, her hands shaking so badly she could barely fasten the clasp. She was tying her fate to a man feared by the entire town, based on a handful of words and a single assessing glance. When she returned to the street, Caleb was already seated on the wagon, the reins held loosely in his hands. He looked down at her and nodded toward the seat beside him. Just as she placed a foot on the wheel hub to climb up, a voice boomed from behind them. "What is the meaning of this, Blackwood?" Mr. Abernathy was striding toward them, his face a blotchy red with fury. Two of his clerks trailed behind him like nervous dogs. "This girl is my concern. She has a debt to settle." Abernathy reached for Lynn's arm, his fingers like fat sausages about to close around her wrist. Before he could touch her, Caleb moved. He wasn't fast, but he was deliberate. He shifted on the wagon seat, placing his body squarely between Lynn and the merchant. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The sheer, uncompromising bulk of him was a wall. "She is no longer your concern, Abernathy," Caleb said, his voice dangerously quiet. "She's with me." "You have no right," Abernathy sputtered, his bravado crumbling in the face of Caleb's granite stillness. "Her father's debt is mine to collect. It's all legal and on paper." "Then you can take it up with me," Caleb replied, his slate-gray eyes fixed on the merchant. "Later." The finality in his tone was absolute. Abernathy's eyes darted from Caleb's face to the worn handle of the pistol holstered on his hip. The merchant swallowed hard, his bluster deflating completely. He took a step back, then another, muttering threats about lawyers and the territorial marshal. Caleb didn't even blink. He simply waited until Abernathy had retreated into the dusty street. Then he looked at Lynn. "Get in." She scrambled onto the wagon seat, her heart pounding. The whole town had seen it. He had publicly defied Abernathy and claimed her. The wagon lurched forward, leaving the whispers and stares of Jericho Springs behind. The ride to his ranch was silent. The landscape grew harsher, the sparse grass giving way to rock and sagebrush. The sun beat down relentlessly. Lynn sat stiffly, her hands clenched in her lap, stealing glances at the man beside her. His face was unreadable, his attention fixed on the road ahead. She had traded one kind of prison for another, and she had no idea what the rules were in this new one. His ranch was little more than a collection of weathered buildings huddled against the base of a rocky mesa. A small, sturdy cabin, a barn in need of repair, and a series of corrals. It was a stark, lonely place, radiating an aura of hard labor and solitude. It looked like him. He pulled the wagon to a halt and got down. "The well is there," he said, pointing. "House is open. I've got stock to see to." He walked away without another word, leaving her standing by the wagon. She watched him go, his long strides eating up the ground. She was alone, miles from anywhere, with a man who is a complete stranger, a man whose protection she had bought at an unknown price. That night she lay awake on a narrow cot in a small, bare room, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the night. Just before he had retired to his own room, he had paused in her doorway. The lamplight cast his scarred face in shadow. "Abernathy won't let this go," he'd said, his voice a low rumble. "He thinks the laundry's deed includes the water rights to the creek behind it. It doesn't, but he'll come for them anyway." He had closed his door, leaving her in the darkness with a new and terrifying piece of the puzzle. This wasn't about a small debt or a laundress's daughter. It was about water. And in this dry, thirsty land, men killed for water. The days that followed fell into a strange, silent rhythm. Lynn rose before the sun, lighting the stove and putting coffee on to boil. Caleb was already gone by then, out in the fields or with the horses. She cleaned the cabin, which was stark but surprisingly tidy, as if its owner tolerated no clutter. She found a small, neglected vegetable patch behind the house and began to weed and water it, coaxing life back into the parched soil. She cooked, leaving his meals on the table. He ate without comment, his presence filling the small space, making it feel even quieter. They rarely spoke. Their communication was one of actions. He began leaving a freshly filled pail of water for her on the porch every morning, saving her the trip to the well. When he saw her struggling to mend one of his torn work shirts with her clumsy needle, he left a small sewing kit on the table the next day, complete with good steel needles and strong thread. He never acknowledged these small kindnesses, but they were there, like stones dropped into a deep well, their ripples spreading in the silence. She watched him. She saw the way his calloused hands were surprisingly gentle as he checked a horse's hoof. She saw him stand at dusk, looking out over his land, his face etched with a weariness that went deeper than physical exhaustion. The feared man of Jericho Springs seemed, in the solitude of his own home, to be profoundly and achingly lonely. His reputation was a wall he had built around himself, and she was now inside it with him. One evening, a week after her arrival, a summer thunderstorm rolled in. The sky turned a bruised purple, and the wind howled around the corners of the cabin. Rain lashed against the windows, and thunder cracked overhead, shaking the very timbers of the house. They were trapped inside together, the storm enforcing a proximity they had both avoided. Lynn sat at the table, mending a shirt, while Caleb cleaned a piece of tack by the fire. The air was thick with unspoken things. The circuit judge was due in Jericho Springs the next day. Their strange arrangement was about to become a legal reality. To break the oppressive silence, she asked the question she had been holding back for days. "Your scar," she said, her voice soft. Was it in a fight?" He stopped what he was doing, his hands going still. He stared into the fire, the flames dancing in his slate-colored eyes. She thought he wouldn't answer, that she had crossed a line. The silence stretched, broken only by the drumming of the rain. "No," he said at last, his voice rough. "Not a fight." He set the leather aside and turned to face her. "Wagon accident, when I was a boy. The axle broke coming down a grade. He paused, and in that pause she heard a world of grief. My parents were killed. I was thrown clear. The simple, unadorned facts were more powerful than any dramatic telling. She could picture it, a terrified boy alone on a desolate road. I was raised by my uncle, he continued, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. He took the land my father left, and he took me. Taught me that the only way to hold on to what's yours is to make other men too afraid to take it. And there it was, the foundation of the man they called Blackwood. Not malice, but a lesson learned in the cruelest way imaginable. His fearsome reputation was not a weapon of aggression, but a shield forged in loss. He rose and went to a small wooden chest in the corner of the room. He took out a tarnished silver locket, small and delicate, and brought it back to the table. He laid it in his palm where it looked impossibly fragile. "It was my mother's," he said. He flicked it open with his thumb. Both sides were empty, just gleaming, vacant ovals. Never had a picture to put in it. The sight of that empty locket, held in the hand of this big, silent man, loosened something in Lynn's chest. It was the saddest thing she had ever seen. Before she could find any words, a sound from outside cut through the storm's fury. The unmistakable splintering of wood. Caleb was on his feet in an instant, his body tense. The sound had come from the direction of the barn. He grabbed the rifle that rested above the fireplace and moved to the door, peering through a crack in the timber. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice low and urgent. But then came a familiar, hated voice, amplified by the wind. "Blackwood, we know you're in there. We've come to discuss a business matter." It was Abernathy. Caleb's jaw tightened. He looked back at Lynn, his eyes hard. "Get in the other room. Bar the door." Abernathy's voice came again, closer this time. "No need for trouble. We just want to look at that deed of yours, the one for your water claim. I have a new survey map that says your creek starts on my property." It was a lie, and they both knew it. This was a land grab, plain and simple. Heavy footsteps crunched on the gravel outside. The front door burst open, and Abernathy stood there, flanked by two hard-faced men Lynn didn't recognize. The merchant's face was slick with rain and smug satisfaction. One of his hired men held a shotgun, its twin barrels pointed directly at Caleb's chest. "Now," Abernathy said, stepping into the cabin, "let's be civilized." He saw Lynn standing frozen by the table. "Ah, the little bride. Girl, you get out of here. This isn't your fight. You tied your wagon to a dead man." He was offering her a way out. She could run. She could abandon this silent, scarred man to his fate and disappear into the night. It was the sensible thing to do. Her arrangement with him was just business, a contract for survival. But as she looked at Caleb, standing tall and unflinching, with a shotgun aimed at his heart, and then at the empty locket still lying on the table, she knew she couldn't. She had come here seeking protection, but she had found something more. A common ground of loneliness. A shared silence that was more honest than all of Abernathy's wheedling words. She took a step, not toward the back room, but to the side, placing herself slightly behind Caleb, but firmly at his side. It was a small gesture, but it was a declaration. Her choice was made. Abernathy laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Brave girl. A terrible waste." He nodded to his man. "Get the deed, Blackwood, or my friend here will redecorate your cabin." Caleb didn't move. He stared at Abernathy, his face impassive. Then he spoke, his voice so quiet it was almost lost in the storm. It was not a threat. It was a simple statement, meant only for the merchant. Lynn couldn't make out the words, but she saw the effect they had. Abernathy's smug expression vanished. The color drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, doughy white. His eyes widened in disbelief, then in pure animal terror. He looked at Caleb as if he were seeing a ghost. 3 months later, the summer heat had given way to the crisp air of early autumn. The ranch was transformed. The field by the creek was no longer brown and struggling, but a swath of healthy green, irrigated by a series of new, well-dug channels. The barn roof was patched, the corral fences were straight and strong, and in the window box of the cabin, a row of stubborn yellow flowers bloomed. Abernathy was gone. The day after the storm, he had sold his store for a fraction of its worth and left Jericho Springs on the morning stage, never to be seen again. Caleb never told Lynn exactly what he had said that night, but she pieced it together from town gossip. He had known something about Abernathy's past, a dark secret from back east involving a cheated partner and a warrant for fraud. Faced with ruin and a hangman's noose, the merchant had chosen exile. The circuit judge had arrived as scheduled. In a dusty office, with 2 strangers as witnesses, Lynn and Caleb had been married. It was a brief, sterile affair of ink and paper. But afterward, Caleb had taken the document to the Territorial Land Office. With the threat from Abernathy gone, he secured a small loan against his clear title. That loan had paid for the seeds, the lumber, and the tools that were now reviving the ranch. Lynn's life had purpose. She managed the household, tended the garden, and kept the account books. She had also made an arrangement for her father's old laundry. An elderly Chinese couple she trusted now ran it, sending her a small but steady share of the profits each month. It was their own money, a testament to their partnership. One evening, Caleb came in from the fields, the scent of turned earth clinging to him. He was quiet, as always, but the hard lines around his eyes had softened. He washed his hands at the basin and came to the table where she was reading. He placed a small, paper-wrapped package in front of her. She looked at him, then carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a daguerreotype in a simple brass frame. It was a portrait of the 2 of them, taken by a traveling photographer who had passed through town last week. They stood stiffly, side by side, their expressions serious for the camera. He looked strong and protective. She looked like she belonged. "It's for the locket," he said, his voice low. She looked up at him, her heart swelling with an emotion she didn't have a name for. It was more than gratitude, deeper than relief. It was a quiet, sturdy thing, built day by day in shared silence and mutual effort. He had filled the empty space, not just in the locket, but in the lonely cabin and in her own life. He didn't say he loved her. He didn't make grand pronouncements. He simply looked at her, his slate-gray eyes holding hers. "It's a start," he said. Lynn looked from his weathered face to the image of them captured in silver and light. A start. In a world that had offered her nothing but brutal endings, a start was everything. They had found their ground, and together they would build upon it. And that brings us to the end of this one. If you stayed with me all the way through, thank you. Stories like this one only get told because folks like you sit down and listen. If you liked what you heard, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you want more stories from the old frontier, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Until then, take care of yourself, and thanks again for being here.